Zima sat quietly at her desk, holding her stomach. Her small face was pale and she was in pain, but she didn't want to say anything. It had been happening for a while now. The ache in her stomach was getting worse, and she felt tired all the time, but no one seemed to notice. "Are you okay, Zima?" her teacher, Mr. Okoro, asked as he walked by. Zima nodded weakly, trying her best to stay strong. But as the day went on, the pain became too much for her to handle. She tried to get up and walk to the door, but everything around her started spinning. Suddenly, Zima collapsed. The principal, Mrs. Bayo, and Mr. Okoro rushed to her side. "Zima! Zima!" they called, but Zima didn't respond. Her little body lay still as they frantically called for help. An ambulance came and Zima was rushed to the hospital. The doctors examined her and found that she was not only sick, but had also been abused. They found infections in her body, and it became clear that something very wrong had been happening in Zima's life. When Zima woke up in the hospital, she was surrounded by people she didn't know. Nurses, doctors, and a kind woman from child services were there. Her parents weren't there yet, but the lady from child services, Ms. Adoku, gently held Zima's hand and asked, "Can you tell me what happened, Zima?" Zima looked up with tears in her eyes. She had been too scared to tell anyone before, but now she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. "It's the lesson teacher," she whispered. He touches me. And the house help. She knew. She didn't do anything." Ms. Adaku nodded and said, "You are very brave for telling me, Zima. We are going to help you." Zima's parents arrived at the hospital a few hours later, after the school called to tell them where Zima was, their faces filled with worry and regret. They hadn't realized just how much they had failed their daughter. They were so focused on their careers that they had completely missed the signs that something was wrong. When they learned what had happened to Zima, the abuse, the neglect, and how much she had suffered, both of them broke down in tears. "How did we let this happen?" Zima's father, Mr. Namdi, said, "We were supposed to protect her." Zima's mother, Mrs. Ada, was crying too. "I'm so sorry, Zima. We didn't know. We were too busy, but that's not an excuse. We should have been there for you." It wasn't always like this for Zima's family. When she was born, her parents were overjoyed. They named her Zima because she brought so much light into their lives. Her parents loved her dearly, and their life was filled with happiness. They lived in a peaceful village, surrounded by nature, and Zima's early years were full of love, laughter, and attention. Her parents spent every moment with her, making sure she was safe and happy. But as time passed, things changed. Both of her parents were very ambitious and driven in their careers. Mr. Anamdi, her father, worked hard to become the top executive in his company, while Mrs. Ada was focused on building her law firm. As they climbed the ladder of success, they slowly began to lose sight of what was most important, Zima. They still loved her deeply, but they became so busy with work that they started neglecting their responsibilities as parents. They dropped Zima off at school, but often forgot to pick her up unless the school called them. Zima would wait for hours, watching other children go home, wondering when her parents would come. "I'm sorry, Zima. We've been so busy at work," her mum would say whenever she finally arrived, and Zima, wanting to make her parents happy, would just nod and say, "It's okay, Mommy." Things only got worse when her parents hired a house help. They were in such a hurry to get someone to take care of Zima that they didn't do proper checks on the girl they hired. Her name was Miri, and she didn't care about Zima at all. Most of the time, Miri would leave Zima alone, not bothering to cook for her or help her with homework. After school, Zima would often have to beg Miri for food and would end up eating the cold leftovers Miri would give her. Sometimes Zima was so hungry that she would fall asleep without eating. She started losing weight, but her parents, caught up in their work, thought it was just part of her growth. "Don't worry, Zima. You're just growing up," her dad said one day when he noticed how thin she had become. But Zima wasn't just growing. She was suffering. She wanted to tell her parents what was happening, but every time she tried, they seemed too busy to listen. At school, Zima's grades began to drop. She had once been a bright, happy student, but now she could barely focus. The principal, Mrs. Bayo, called Zima's parents to tell them that Zima was struggling. "She isn't completing her homework, and she seems very distant," the principal said. Zima's parents, realizing that something was wrong, decided to get her a lesson teacher. But instead of solving the problem, things got much worse. The lesson teacher, Mr. Coyote, started touching Zima in ways that made her uncomfortable. "Sit on my lap while I help you with your homework," he would say. Zima felt scared, but didn't know what to do. When she tried to tell the house help, Miri, what was happening, Miri just shrugged. "Do whatever you can, Zima. The lesson teacher will help you with your problems when he comes." Miri didn't care at all. In fact, she wasn't even around most of the time. She often went to visit her friend who lived down the street, leaving Zima alone with the lesson teacher. Zima felt completely sad. One weekend, Zima tried to talk to her mum. She said, "Mum, I don't like the lesson teacher. He makes me feel bad." But her mum, who was tired from work, just waved her off. "Zima, go play with your toys. If you need new toys, let me know," she said. Zima felt even more alone. Things reached a breaking point when Mr. Kayode realized Zima was always alone. He would come by even when it wasn't lesson time. He took advantage of the fact that her parents were never home and the house help was never around. Each time Mr. Kayode came, he would touch Zima inappropriately and tell her not to tell anyone. "If you tell, no one will believe you," he would say. Zima wanted to scream for help, but she didn't know who to turn to. Her parents were never home, and when they were too tired to listen. She begged her mum one weekend to cook for her because she missed her food, but her mum just sighed and called Miri, telling her to prepare something. "Go watch your TV show, Zima," her dad would say when she tried to tell him what was happening. One day, Miri came home earlier than usual and found Mr. Kayode touching Zima. Instead of reporting it, she agreed to keep quiet in exchange for money and gifts from the lesson teacher. From that moment on, Zima felt even more trapped. She had no one to turn to, and the abuse continued. Weeks went by, and Zima became weaker and more withdrawn. The school principal noticed that Zima wasn't her usual self, and one day, after Zima complained of stomach pain, Mrs. Bayo asked her what was wrong. "Zima, can you tell me what's going on?" But before Zima could answer, she collapsed right there in the principal's office. Zima was rushed to the hospital, and it was there that the truth finally came out. The doctors found signs of abuse and neglect, and child services were called immediately. Zima's parents were devastated when they learned what had happened. They couldn't believe that they had missed all the signs. "How could we let this happen to our daughter?" Mrs. Ada cried. "We were so focused on work that we didn't see what was right in front of us," Mr. Namdi said. Child services decided that Zima couldn't go back home until her parents had proven that they could take care of her properly. Zima was placed in the care of a loving foster family while her parents attended counseling and parenting classes. Zima's parents worked hard to change. They went to every counseling session and parenting class, determined to make things right. They realized that their careers would never be more important than their daughter. Meanwhile, Zima received therapy to help her heal from the trauma she had experienced. Her therapist, Dr. Ife, helped her talk about her feelings and gave her the tools to cope with her pain. "It wasn't your fault, Zima," Dr. Ife told her during one session. "You are strong and you can heal." Zima still missed her parents, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Months later, Zima's parents were finally allowed to bring her back home. But this time, things were different. They had learned how to be present for their daughter, and they made sure that Zima knew she was their top priority. "We love you so much, Zima," her mum said as they spent a weekend cooking together. "We'll never let anything come between us again," her dad added. Zima smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in a long time. She knew that her parents had changed, and she believed that things would be better from now on. As for the lesson teacher and the house help, they were both arrested and sent to jail for their actions. Justice was served, and Zima no longer had to live in fear. Life slowly returned to normal. Zima's grades improved, and she started to smile again. Her parents made sure that she was never left alone, and they spent every moment they could with her. They had learned the hard way that nothing was more important than family. Moral of the story: never let work or other distractions come before the people you love. A child needs love, care, and attention more than anything else. Neglecting those responsibilities can lead to great harm. Always take the time to be there for your loved ones and never ignore the signs that something might be wrong. A family's love is more important than any job, and it's our duty to protect those we care about. The end. Thanks for watching. Did you enjoy the video? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. See you next time.